Hello and welcome to We Caribbean, a special program in which we discuss and analyze the issues affecting the region, giving a voice to those who are impacted. It's their issues, their concerns, their triumphs on We Caribbean. I'm your host, Doris Polo. Amid a global crisis, the U.S. imposed economic, commercial and financial blockades against Cuba and Venezuela persist, causing devastating effects on these countries. This includes limiting their ability to purchase food, medicine and care for their people. Still, they resist, often lending a helping hand to Caribbean countries that are less fortunate. In the latest show of support, South Africa welcomed Cuban health professionals who arrived to support ongoing efforts to curb the spread of the novel coronavirus on Sunday. The historic moment was carried live on the South African Broadcast Corporation and watched by many. Cuba-South Africa solidarity dates back to the struggle against colonialism and apartheid. And health professionals from Cuba are also in the Caribbean with 599 doctors, nurses and other specialists deployed as part of Henry Reeve's specialized medical brigades. So the Caribbean community, CARICOM, has consistently expressed its support for Cuba and Venezuela. And joining us to discuss that solidarity are Candice Sebro, Education and Research Officer for the Oilfield Workers Trade Union in Trinidad and Tobago, and Laura Stevens, Vice President of the St. Vincent Solidarity Committee with Venezuela. Hi guys, thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. Good morning and thank you.
Candice, can you describe Trinidad's relationship with Cuba and Venezuela, and what impression would you say the citizens have of those countries?
Trinidad and Tobago has had a relationship with Cuba and Venezuela for a number of years. We have had relations with Venezuela since the time of Chavez. We are part of the Petro-Caribbean Agreement. And in terms of Cuba, we have been working with Cuba on a number of initiatives, including now in fighting the COVID. One of the major issues surrounding Venezuela in this moment would be due to the economic crisis that is currently happening. So one of the major things that would have been a default would have been immigration issues, for example. And there were some things that OWT in particular had to mobilize around because there were growing sentiments in terms of what was happening in Venezuela and the impact that it was having on Trinidad and Tobago in particular.
Now, Laura, actually, based on what Candice just said, we know that the political situation in Venezuela has been highlighted by Western media, and some might say it was masterminded by the U.S. and its allies. You, Laura, have visited Venezuela yourself. How was your first-hand experience, and how has that differed from reports coming out of the West?
There's always, when it comes to certain mediums, especially CNN, etc., you're always hearing stories making the people of Venezuela look as if they're dictators, the leader, Maduro. Now, under Chavez's governance, everything seemed to have been going fine. On the death of him, however, Trump, now that he is in administration, he is giving the world the wrong impression about Venezuela. However, my visit there, I've seen Venezuela as a nation of peace and progress. And I always have a message. It is self-governing state, it's a self-governing state, not a colony. The Bolivarian mission have a series of social programs. Over 30 implemented under the administration of the former Venezuelan president, Hugo Chavez, and is continued by his successor, Nicolas Maduro. These programs focus on social justice, social welfare, anti-poverty, educational and military recruiting. I have also seen the joy that comes from the government and people as they give freely of their resources, as much as they are limited. We in St. Vincent and Grenadines have benefited vastly. We have one per child laptop initiative, that's one program. We were given a power plant. There are so many things, numerous to talk about. But by and large, whatever I have heard before from the Western medium, it is not true. I have been there. From what my eyes have seen, from what my ears have heard, from many conferences, from what I've seen on the streets, where they talk about people living in such impoverished state, the supermarkets were empty. I did not see that. So I think that Trump and his administration, even though Trump is dead, I still think that America will push forward to see how they can capitalize on the minds of the people in the world, because they want to see Venezuela as such a monstrous place. They're a fully democratic country, and I think that their rights should not be trampled on. My message to Trump is hands off Venezuela.
Definitely calling for an end to imperialism. And Candice, with the United States now sending warships and troops near Venezuela under the guise that it's to end narco trafficking, what does this mean for the region, and should CARICOM countries be apprehensive?
The situation with the fleet in the Caribbean Sea is one that is a grave cause for concern, of course. It shows serious disregard for our position as a Caribbean region, because, as you know, we have voted for the region to be a zone of peace. So at this stage, when you have Trump in the midst of this pandemic sending a fleet, of course, it becomes a grave cause for concern. In addition to which, it's very interesting to see that the medical States is definitely not at its best in terms of managing this issue. And Trump has chosen to prioritize regime change in Venezuela, as well as asking for $15 million for any information with regards to some new drug trafficking charges that he would like to bring to the fore. So it seems like a deflection in terms of the craziness that's happening in the United States and his inability to manage it. At this point, I believe it was just this week that social media was buzzing with all the jokes about his recommendation on ingesting disinfectant in order to fight the COVID. And more attention on the United States is showing how they've mismanaged this entire pandemic, which is in direct contrast to Venezuela, the regime that he's constantly attacking and saying that they are incapable of handling things, where they've been able to keep their numbers at a minimum. I think Venezuela's numbers are, I believe, at 300, if I'm not mistaken, which is less than even small Caribbean islands, and they've been able to manage it in spite of all the sanctions and everything that's happening. So yes, we are concerned, and as always, CARICOM has maintained a position for our region to be a zone of peace. And the constant disregard that Trump has shown with regards to our positions that have been taken with regards to Venezuela just become more and more flagrant as time goes by.
Yes, and now participating in an international solidarity conference held in Havana back in November, St. Vincent and the Grenadines Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves had this to say about the legacy of the people of Cuba.
Revolutionary Cuba and its foreign ministry have been beacons. They shed light, they illuminate pathways, and they provide the framework for the exemplars of solidarity all over the world, whether it's in Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, Venezuela, St. Vincent and Grenadines, wherever, in whatever form. It's just extraordinary. And it's a tribute to the brave and heroic Cuban people.
We have seen Cuba and Venezuela show their generosity amid this global crisis that's taking place. We've had Cuba send healthcare teams to Africa, Latin America, Europe, the Middle East, and the Caribbean, as well as we've had Venezuela, donate medical supplies to these countries. While on the other hand, we have the United States blocking the supplies from leaving the United States to go to some of these countries. What can international nations, learn from Cuba and Venezuela?
If you may permit me, I just want to talk a little about Cuba and Venezuela and what they would have done to, especially in this pandemic, to countries around the world. The nations of Venezuela and Cuba, despite the sanctions and embargo, which has been made it very difficult for the economies, their hearts ache to see other fellow human beings suffering at the hands of the COVID-19. From what they have received, which I do believe was from Russia, another sanction state, Venezuela has sent thousands of COVID-19 rapid test kits to Antigua, Bermuda, Dominica, Grenada, and my country, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, each receiving 3,000. Cuba, the island nation, is sending medical personnel around the world to help other countries. Brothers and sisters around the world, hear me. Follow these heartwarming, generous nations of Cuba and Venezuela, who give not out of their abundance. And I want you to listen to this. They give not out of their abundance, but out of the little they were allowed to receive. Mind you, their blessings will multiply. And if you do the same, I am sure that will happen for you as well.
Definitely a showcase of solidarity coming out from Cuba and Venezuela. It's now time for a short break. We will continue where we left off after this, but first, some music from Havana, Cuba. This is Pupui and Los Que Son Son.
Innovation, science, the technological breakthrough, and its influence in society.
Viajeros del saber, el futuro está aquí.
Atomen. Monday, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. So, picking up where we left off, Dominica was among 4 Caribbean nations which received diagnostic testing kits and reagents from Venezuela as the Bolivarian Republic continues to assist its neighbors in the fight against COVID-19. And at the handover ceremony, Dominica took the opportunity to echo calls for an end to the unilateral coercive measures against the Latin American country.
I would like to call on the international community. Let us seek and find a peaceful resolution to the problems now being faced in Venezuela. We do not believe that civil war will solve the problem. In fact, that has proven to create more problems in other parts of the world. And so I would like to join our other CARICOM brothers and sisters in calling for a peaceful solution, a peaceful resolution to the problems now being undergone in Venezuela.
In contrast, several countries have seen their supplies blocked. 20 ventilators destined for Barbados have been seized by the United States, and their health minister said the ventilators were donated by a well-wisher to help the country handle coronavirus cases, but were confiscated by U.S. authorities before they could be exported to the Caribbean nation. So, Candace, back to you. Before the break, we asked Laura and she responded. What are your thoughts on the way international countries are treating with poorer nations who are struggling right now to fight the novel coronavirus? And what can they learn from Venezuela and Cuba?
Well, I would really like to pick up on the point that you just made. I think it's interesting to look at Cuba and Venezuela, countries that are suffering sanctions, and that one would think they would be finding difficulty to get the resources to address their own internal issues, whereas you have them going out supplying aid, and they're not supplying aid based on the persons who have the same political regime as them, or who are simply their allies. They've been all over the globe helping persons. They're in Trinidad and Tobago, they're in Dominica, they're in Barbados. They're all over assisting and bringing aid because they recognize that the pandemic it's a health issue, it's a human issue, and so they believe that health should be prioritized at this moment. Whereas you have the contrast of the United States, who is the supposed financial economic power, and they are struggling to manage the disease, and their response, instead of assisting with health, etc., what they've been found doing is redirecting the things that people need for their own internal matters. Instead of assisting, instead of taking a position that we would supply people on this or we would send aid somewhere, they've carried word to Venezuela, and then they've been trying to take away the resources that very people need. So I found that to be a very interesting turn of events. I think one of my colleagues even said the mask of the United States has fallen off, because they really have not been able to respond in that demonstrates that they have any great grasp in terms of leading in this regard. And when you think of the resources required to respond to this pandemic, Italy, which is a large country, Spain, they have not been able to respond. And yet, with the little resources that Venezuela and Cuba have, they've been able to not only respond well, but to bring aid to other countries. And amidst all of that, we have global entities calling for the removal of sanctions, and yet the United States chooses to ramp up and to bring more anarchy to countries in a moment where everybody is speaking solidarity.
And the strategic oil alliance between Venezuela and Caribbean countries, because we know Candace mentioned this before, through Petrocaribe, has been negatively affected by U.S. sanctions, including the Dragon gas oil deal between Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago. Laura, I'm going to go to you now. Are these sanctions causing other countries in the region to become collateral damage?
Of course, there is a downturn in the economy. For example, we here in St. Vincent, with the Petrocaribe agreement, before I can't remember the exact number, but we used to receive much more than we are receiving now. So that is definitely a decline there. And of course, with the COVID-19 pandemic, it has become much more difficult. Seeing that countries right now, they have to cut back because there isn't a free flow of monies being injected into the economy. So, of course, yes, I believe that every country that has partnered with Cuba is being affected.
And Candace, Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley had touted the deal between Venezuela, saying it would, stimulate the economy. And now we heard this year that the deal had fallen through. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that it is a great catastrophe that the deal has fallen through. Venezuela has a great resource in terms of oil. Everybody knows that. They have the biggest reserves in the world. And so us being right here strategically, geographically, also as an oil exporting nation, and I mean, up till recently, we also refined. There were great avenues for the development. We don't only provide oil domestically, we were exporters for the entire Caribbean region. So when you have major changes like that in our main economic source, then of course we are all impacted. The budget that we can work with, how the economy runs, the quality of life, all of that changes. So that is an unfortunate reality that is affecting all of us in the region.
Yeah. And Laura, Caribbean unity has been threatened by the United States, with U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo calling for a meeting in Jamaica in January. And when he went, he actually didn't even invite all CARICOM members, the 15 members. And so we heard the chair of the Caribbean community saying she was not going to attend because it was a bit disrespectful. Would you say that the unity of the Caribbean is being threatened, especially because we have countries such as Jamaica and Haiti flip-flopping on their position as it relates to intervention in Venezuela?
Most definitely. I think Jamaica and Haiti are being selfish. They're aligned with the Trump government for their own individual interests, and this should not be, because America really is not doing anything for our Caribbean peoples. So I think they really need to forge, as I mentioned before, I'm going to reiterate it, the OECS and the CARICOM need to forge unity. They need to forge strength in order to combat all that is happening with Trump and his regime. As a people, we need to know, we need to be able to differentiate the difference between who has our back. I'm going to say layman's term, who has our back and who don't. Now, it's yes, I know that we all have to fight because we want favors from maybe another nation in America, but what really is America doing for us? I know for us here in St. Vincent and Grenadines, America is not doing anything for us. Who is? Are the sanctions nations, Cuba and Venezuela. But I want to say to the peoples of the Caribbean, you need to forget about self for a moment, because united we stand. And remember that if, for instance, the countries that are allies with Cuba and Venezuela right now, and Trump, when Trump sees that, with the heart that he has, with the cold heart that he has, he would want to bring trouble to us. But if we stand together, it will be very difficult for him to penetrate. And especially with using our Caribbean waters to want to infiltrate into Venezuela, we need to make a firm stand against him and let him know that he cannot trample on our democratic rights.
It's interesting that you mentioned Jamaica being aligned with the United States, because even Jamaica, the United States had blocked medical equipment from reaching that country to fight the novel coronavirus. And unfortunately, we are just about running out of time. And so I would like to ask you guys, what sort of message, starting with Candice, would you send to the people of Cuba and Venezuela facing these unilateral coercive measures or sanctions at this time?
Well, as a person from Trinidad and Tobago, I would like to commend the people of Venezuela and Cuba for their strength and their resilience that they have maintained over the years. And I would also like to commend them in their demonstration of international solidarity and their stance for humanity at this point. We always stood with the people of Cuba and Venezuela in the Oilfield Workers Trade Union. And I dare say even CARICOM takes a strong position in terms of protecting their sovereignty and their right to self-determination. And so I just want to say we stand with you and we salute you at this time.
Closing comments?
Yes, I want to say Venezuela and Cuba, we here in St. Vincent and Grenadines and with our neighboring countries, we are here to stand with you throughout your hardships. You have reached out to us even in this time of this pandemic COVID-19, you have given to us freely from your hearts, even though you have just a little. We know that you have our best interests at heart, and we want to let you know that we have your interests at heart, and we will stand with you, we will stand by you, and if the fight should come, we will be here in support.
Thank you so much. With that, I'd like to thank our guests, Candace Sebro with the Oil Field Workers Trade Union out of Trinidad and Tobago, and Laura Stevens, the Vice President of the St. Vincent Solidarity Committee with Venezuela. I'm Doris Polo, and we leave you with another musical performance out of Havana of the famous Moncada. They are one of the first groups that emerged after the victory of the Cuban Revolution, and which also founded the new Trova movement in the country.
Pero en la noche sale